So, hello again, Michele.
Hi, Alastair.
You're back in Wellington?
I'm back in Wellington just to talk to you.
Brilliant. So, you've just released another State of the Nation report, which is an annual event for Morgan Research. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that to start off with?
Well, the State of the Nation report is basically when we take all of the data that we've collected over the year, which is generally about 12,000 interviews across New Zealand, and put it all together and say, so what have we found? So we look at some of the trends, some of the social trends and trends in technology, and then in this instance, we've actually decided to have a look at Wellington, people living in Wellington, people living in Auckland, and people living in the rest of New Zealand.
And we've found that there's quite a lot of differences between the different parts of the country.
Yeah, we have. And for those of you who live in Wellington or Auckland, you may not find it surprising, but as an outsider, it was quite enlightening. So I suppose in the first instance, it's not surprising that you see people in Auckland and Wellington a little bit more affluent than outside, a little bit more socially progressive. So all of those normal things were there. But there were some interesting things about, say, youth. And if you look at the data, seeing that Auckland's a much younger population. So
yes.
Some of those things, interesting.
The Auckland population is much more immigrant-based. There's much more likely, I think it's twice as likely as the Wellington population to have been born outside of the country.
Absolutely.
And much more ethnically diverse. I mean, we're talking twice as many Pacific Islanders and 3 times as many Asians in Auckland as Wellington,
yes.
and even more so than the rest of the country.
Yeah, so we see in Auckland, obviously the population's grown really quickly, twice the rate that the rest of the country's growing.
24% versus 11, I think, over the last 10 years.
Something like that, yeah. So a big growth in population, and obviously a lot of that has come from people from other places, and it's really creating a much more cosmopolitan and youthful feel about Auckland. And for instance, on a question like, I consider myself to be a New Zealander, people in Auckland are less likely to consider themselves to be a New Zealander than people even in Wellington, and people outside of Auckland and Wellington much more likely to really strongly identify with being New Zealand.
The Auckland population is down to 61% European descent now, which is quite, it's a lot lower than the rest of the country.
Yeah, cosmopolitan.
Yes. So we've also seen that Auckland households are bigger, and they're less likely to have teenagers than Wellingtonians.
Yes.
Which that's quite a strong statistic in the demographics. So
Yes.
why I think that's because of more young single people in Wellington.
I think that's right. I think it's this whole pattern of youth and that sort of vibrant young people coming in from other places. I think the bigger households are actually, if you think about student households or people getting started where they're actually sharing accommodation, we're probably seeing more of that. We also see it playing out in terms of where people are living in rented accommodation rather than houses that they own or are actually buying. So that really sort of stable situation of buying a home, or even though you're still paying it off, much less likely to be the case in Auckland.
Yeah, much higher levels of renting and less home ownership and high levels of indebtedness. And Auckland is also more worried about interest rates than the rest of the country, which I think is not surprising.
Not surprisingly. Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Everyone talks about interest rates and we watch it really closely to see if interest rates are going up or down. But the biggest hit is really for people with mortgages. And that's one of the whole areas, because people who are living on their savings or living on investments, for them an interest rate hike is actually quite a good thing. So concerns about interest rates are most likely to hit those places.
So while we're talking about economics, Wellingtonians are by far the most affluent. They're very, very strong in the A, B and C quintiles, like 50% in the top 2, top 40% of household income. And they're less, but strangely they're slightly less confident in terms of consumer confidence, and they're more likely to be employed. There's higher levels of employment in Wellington.
Yeah, given that it's so good, why are they so worried?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is you're absolutely right. They do have high levels of income. They're more likely to be in that A-B group. They tend to be employed in sort of professional managerial positions. And I think all of the issues about concern about the economy is really that they are a fairly sophisticated mob. They are actually looking at the economy and they're considering what's really happening rather than just thinking about themselves. They're not just thinking, well, I'm okay. They're looking more broadly at the economy, and I think as a result of that, they're a little bit more likely to be judging the government a bit harshly. They're concerned about what the government's doing. So I think a combination of sometimes you get a bit of conservatism when economic conservatism when you have wealth to lose. So there's a little bit of that, but more importantly, I think it's actually the more affluent, sophisticated, looking at reality.
They show up in the media statistics as well. They're more likely to be reading newspapers, and they're more likely to be going to news websites online.
So they're more likely to be hearing about the economy, aren't they? Yeah, they're just more engaged with the nation, the economy, what's going on, and therefore concerned about it.
They prefer wine. They, for some reason, have slightly poor dental hygiene in Wellington. I don't quite know why. Aucklanders are more, but they're also fitter, which was another thing I thought was slightly interesting. They're less likely to be obese, Wellingtonians than Aucklanders.
Yes. And I think that's a bit of a trend. We around the Western world, we're increasingly concerned about being overweight. We're increasingly on diets. We're increasingly, watching what we eat in all various fads. But the reality is we're not getting any thinner. We're all kind of gradually getting more and more overweight and obese. But what you see almost consistently is that you have country areas are going to have greater problems with overweight than city areas. It does seem to be very strongly correlated with education and affluence. Education and affluence creating less obesity. People know what to look for, they know about exercise, they know what to eat, they do the right thing, they can afford to buy the right food that they need. So it's probably predictable that Wellington would actually be in that better state.
So Wellingtonians also have less cancer. They're more progressive in their views. They're more attracted to new things, and they're more disposed to homosexual adoption, which is a sort of a proxy for social liberalism.
Socially aware, open-minded, all of those sorts of things coming through very strongly about Wellington.
And less religious than Auckland. Auckland, on the other hand, are slightly more generous towards charities, more concerned about crime and more concerned about corruption. And I wonder if a lot of that may be partly to do with, I think in the case of crime, I think there possibly is more concern about crime in some parts of Auckland. But that there's no influence from the immigrant population there in terms of...
I think there's a combination of all of those things really. I think you've got possibly the immigrant population bringing the religiosity, if you like, because I think there was a greater support for religion being taught in government schools coming through in Auckland, and that may well correlate with different groups coming into Auckland and seeing that. But the other thing is, once you've got a bigger city and you've got more problems with all sorts of things in big cities like traffic, etc., and an immigrant population, a cosmopolitan population brings wonderful things, but it also brings concerns about crime and those sorts of things. So it probably is just the area that they're living in rather than them being inherently more fearful as people.
Yeah, we also have Wellington is just slightly more negative about the government.
Yes.
But not a great deal. And the entire country seems to be of a voice at the moment. They all seem to, it's roughly 45% of the population are not that happy with the government at the moment.
Correct.
That's a change too, I think.
Yes, that is a change. There is a bit of a swing against the government and against the way the government's running the country and the direction that the country's going in. I think that would, in general, I think it correlates with concerns about the economy. I think people, when we ask them what's the biggest issue facing New Zealand, the economy still stands out. Economic things is the really big issue. So it's not surprising if people are concerned about the economy, they're going to sort of look to the government. And if it's not getting better, they'll look to the government with less than positive views. They're not about to throw the government out, but they are actually raising these sorts of concerns. And as we said earlier, it's bound to be that people in Wellington for all of the reasons like they have more to lose and they're more aware of economic things, are going to be looking more critically at the government. So I don't think that's really surprising.
Finally, there's various other things. Wellingtonians consume more energy. I think that's because it's colder. It seems they consume more energy than everybody, actually.
Yeah, maybe.
They certainly burn a lot of gas, apparently.
One of the funny things though is affluent people use more energy. You know, in all of the research that you do, it's like people who have bigger homes, they sort of feel the need to use more energy. They don't try and conserve. It's not such an issue. So affluence will be a part of that as well.
They also have adopted smartphones more rapidly than everybody.
Yes.
But smartphones are enormous. I mean, the uptake of smartphones in the last 2 years has gone from 15% to close to 40%. And in Wellington, it's over 40%.
Yeah, it's about 42%.
Yeah, which is a remarkable.
It's just going like that.
Going up, and I think it's going to be up there with broadband penetration soon, I would imagine.
Absolutely. So what you've got going on here is a couple of things. Technology adoption, and we look at technology adoption in terms of people who are early adopters and right through to people who are sort of laggards. Now in Wellington, the technology adopters, there's more of them than anywhere else. So they're right into high tech. And that's really a combination of affluence, you can afford to buy all the gear, and sort of an open-mindedness, you know, engagement with technology. So put the two together and you've got Wellington.
Yeah.
And that really is showing itself in smartphones. But what happens with smartphones, it's really interesting, is like the internet has made a whole lot of changes to things. You can search for anything, you can interact, you can do all of those things online. What a smartphone does means that you can do all of that stuff anywhere. And so I think that's why we see this really exponential curve, or an exponential, almost more than a curve, a straight line going straight up for smartphones. It's like once you start doing that, you never turn back, and everybody will jump on the bandwagon. It's a lot higher in Australia.
So basically, the data is showing that Wellington is basically more sophisticated.
I think so.
But at the same time, possibly a little bit less dynamic than Auckland in terms of certainly change.
Well, I think Auckland has that youthful feel about it, and you know, you'd expect in Auckland people will just try new stuff for the heck of it. They'll actually just be wanting to have a go, and there is a sense of, I suppose, fun and trying things, etc. Whereas in Wellington, it does seem to be a more considered and generally sophisticated, more well-rounded approach to things.
And finally, Wellington is one of the things that came out of this, as far as you were concerned, is that you thought that Wellington would be like Canberra.
I did.
And it's not.
No, I don't think it is. Yes, as an Aussie, I thought, okay, well, Wellington will be New Zealand's Canberra. And I've done quite a lot of work looking at Canberra and what it was like in Australia. And Canberra is, as I've said, it's like Disneyland. It's a really quite separate, isolated piece of Australia, much, much more affluent. The schools are so much better. There's no levels of unemployment. People in Canberra just are so different than the rest of Australia, and particularly different to anything in rural areas. There's just no comparison.
Are they liberal and optimistic, like Wellingtonians?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
Right.
They're very, very optimistic, and they're very, it's like Canberra's just, it really is like Disneyland. You step in there and everything's fine. Taxi drivers are really pleasant, you know, nobody's hassled, everyone's got a job.
Right.
And even if you don't work for the government, you work supporting the government, so there's this positive sense, and there's no possibility that you can understand what real unemployment's like, what it's like to have kids going to a terrible school. So there's a real disconnect. And I don't think there's anything like the degree of disconnect. We've been talking about differences, but there's shades of difference. The difference between Wellington, Auckland and the rest of New Zealand, it's shades. It's not a total disconnect.
Yeah. I do wonder whether if you confine yourself to central Wellington as opposed to Wellington plus the greater Wellington, you might find something which is a little bit more similar.
You know what, you could do that, and what we could do is we could look at central Wellington, and then we could take the far-flung parts of New Zealand, and we could see extremes. We could see really big differences, And that's interesting to do as well. But I think it's kind of important to realise that people in New Zealand, the vast majority, consider themselves to be New Zealanders. There are lots of similarities, there are lots of things that hold the people together. And we need to remember those rather than just pick real extreme differences.
Thank you very much, Michele.
Pleasure.
I hope you have a good time tomorrow with your house.
Thanks.